What happens when someone walks into a high-end car dealership, looking like he just stepped off a farm, carrying a dusty old sack, and claims he owns the place? They laughed. But what happened next left every single person in that dealership speechless. Stick around, because what you're about to hear isn't just surprising, it's unforgettable. It was a Wednesday morning when Harold Mason stepped off the city bus. His jeans were worn out at the knees, the cuffs muddy from the walk, and his boots had clearly seen better days. He was carrying an old brown sack over his shoulder, the type you'd expect to see carrying potatoes or maybe a few rusty tools. But the way Harold held it, close to his side like it mattered, caught a few glances. The bus stop was a few blocks down from one of the city's most luxurious car dealerships. Polished floors, smiling salesmen in shiny suits, cars parked under white lights that made every surface sparkle. That morning, the dealership had just taken delivery of 3 new luxury models, and the mood was high. Customers browsed, sipping complimentary espresso. Employees adjusted their ties in the showroom mirror. Then Harold walked in. There was a pause in the air, not because anyone thought anything was about to happen, just that people weren't used to seeing someone like him in that kind of place. His boots echoed on the polished floor, and the sack thudded lightly against his back with every step. He walked straight up to the main desk, looked the receptionist in the eye, and said, "I'm here to check on my property." The woman behind the desk blinked. She thought he meant he parked in the lot, or maybe left something behind. She asked what he meant. Harold, without blinking, said, "This dealership. I believe it's under my name." That's when the first chuckle escaped someone's lips. A salesman nearby tilted his head like he misheard. Another one turned around with a smirk. The receptionist, trying to stay professional, gave a polite smile and said, "Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding." Harold simply nodded and pointed toward the manager's office. "Is he in?" Now the chuckles turned to whispers. Some of the staff thought he was joking. Others thought he might be someone's uncle trying to pull a prank. The manager, a sharp-suited man named Brian Lockwood, walked out, clearly curious about the noise. He spotted Harold and frowned. Brian was the kind of guy who believed he could read people. He glanced at Harold's sack and thought, another wanderer with too much time. He stepped forward, arms folded, and said, "Can I help you with something?" Harold reached into his sack. There was a split second of silence. Everyone tensed, but all he pulled out was a folder, a thick one. He handed it over to Brian. "Check the name on the title, it should match mine." Brian hesitated. He didn't want to look, but he also didn't want to ignore it and deal with some legal situation later. So he opened the folder. His eyes scanned the first page, and his smile faltered. Behind him, one of the junior staff laughed, trying to lighten the moment. "Hey man, you lost? You think you bought a dealership?" Harold didn't even look at him. He kept his eyes on Brian, calm, steady, like he already knew what was in that folder. Brian flipped to the second page, then the third. His face went pale. The documents weren't fake. They were official, signed, and notarized. There were property transfer papers, stock agreements, ownership details, and a clean chain of events showing the transfer of full control of that dealership to one Harold Mason. Still silent, Brian looked up and asked, "Where did you get these?" Harold didn't smile. "Earned them, fair and square." Now the dealership wasn't laughing anymore. Some of the customers turned to watch. A few of the employees stood frozen. Brian tried to find a way out, maybe a technicality. He asked, "Is this a prank?" Did someone put you up to this? Harold shook his head slowly. If I were you, I'd check the email that was sent to your legal department last night. The changeover was confirmed at midnight. Brian pulled out his phone, walked quickly back to his office, and slammed the door. For a full 2 minutes, there was just silence in the showroom. People watched Harold like he was holding a live wire, unsure what to say, unsure what to do. Then the door opened. Brian walked out, slower this time. His voice was quieter now. Mr. Mason, I believe we have a lot to discuss. That's when everything shifted. Harold didn't walk around gloating. He didn't throw his weight around. He just asked for a seat. Someone brought him a bottle of water, no longer sure how to treat him. The same man they'd whispered about. The one they laughed at for looking like a farmhand, now sat in the dealership's meeting room with the manager, reviewing contracts. What the employees didn't know, what none of them could have guessed, was that Harold wasn't just some lucky guy who found a legal loophole. His journey to that moment started decades earlier, and every step he took led him right through those glass doors. It all started when Harold was 19. He had no formal degree, no special connections. He grew up in a small town, raised by a mechanic father and a mother who worked at the local diner. They didn't have much, but Harold had something not everyone did: persistence. Not the loud, dramatic kind, the quiet, steady kind, the kind that chips away at failure until there's nothing left but results. When he was a teenager, he helped his father in the garage, learned how engines worked, how gears moved, how to fix things that people gave up on. He saved every penny from part-time jobs, and by 21, bought his first junk car for $100. People laughed at him then too, said the car would never run. But 6 weeks later, it purred like new. He sold it for 15 times what he paid, and that was the beginning. For years, Harold bought broken vehicles, fixed them in borrowed garages, sold them, not fast, not flashy, but steady. And every dollar he earned, he split in two, half to survive, half to invest. Then came the sack. Harold never liked banks. He didn't trust easy numbers on a screen. He liked real weight. So he kept most of his savings, cash, records, deeds, in a thick, rough brown sack that he carried when things got serious. It wasn't about being secretive. It was about being grounded. By his late 30s, Harold had ownership in 7 used car lots across the state. Quietly, never as the face of the brand, always the back-end partner. He learned the business from the inside out, not just the sales, but the contracts, the taxes, the logistics. He became a ghost investor, always present, never noticed, and that's how he found the opportunity. The dealership he walked into had been struggling for years under the surface. Fancy suits and luxury cars didn't cover up bad bookkeeping. The parent company had been looking to offload it quietly. They wanted someone who wouldn't bring drama, someone who'd say yes, sign the line, and disappear. They didn't count on Harold. He bought controlling shares through a shell company, quietly, efficiently. By the time the employees noticed, it was already done. All it took was one final visit in person, with his sack and his paperwork, to seal the moment. But this wasn't revenge for being laughed at. This was something else. What Harold did next stunned even those who believed they'd seen it all in business. Because while everyone thought he was just here to take ownership, Harold had a plan they couldn't see coming. And what he did after sitting in that meeting room changed lives. Harold sat across the table from Brian Lockwood, who now looked more like an intern on his first day than a dealership manager. The shift in tone was clear. Nobody dared interrupt their conversation. Staff walked by slowly, trying not to eavesdrop but unable to stay completely away. The confidence that had filled the room earlier that morning was gone. In its place, confusion, disbelief, and a strange kind of curiosity. Brian cleared his throat. So, I just want to make sure we're clear. You're not here to shut things down? Harold looked at him for a moment and said, "That was never the plan. This place is worth saving. The cars sell themselves. The problem isn't the cars." Brian waited. Harold didn't explain right away. He took a slow sip of water, then set the bottle down. You ever notice how people stop listening the second they think they know more than you? Brian didn't respond. Harold continued. I walked in here carrying everything that built this moment in one sack, and folks laughed. That's not the problem. The problem is they laughed because they thought someone who looks like me couldn't possibly know anything about this business. But I've been in this business longer than half your team's been alive. Brian tried to smile, awkwardly. I didn't mean any disrespect. I know you didn't. That's the problem. The room fell quiet again. Harold leaned back in his chair. People work hard in places like this. Salesmen come in every day hoping to hit targets. Mechanics in the back barely get a break. Admins shuffle papers until their hands go numb. All while folks at the top skim the cream off the top and ignore the cracks. Brian looked unsure. What cracks? Harold pushed the folder forward. Inside were spreadsheets, invoices, employee feedback reports, maintenance bills, and old emails. Documents the old owners never cared about. Things that pointed to growing issues. Customer complaints that were marked resolved, but never answered. Warranty claims that were lost, but really just ignored. A mechanic in the service center who hadn't taken a day off in 14 months. This place doesn't need a new coat of paint. It needs a new spine, Harold said. That's why I'm here. He stood, picked up his sack, and said, Let's get to work. By noon, word had spread. Staff didn't know what to believe. Some thought Harold would replace everyone. Others were convinced he'd sell off the place piece by piece. The tension grew thicker every hour. But Harold didn't fire a single person. Instead, he asked for a full list of every employee. Names, roles, pay, and time spent with the company. Then he did something nobody expected. He called a full staff meeting. Every department, every person. They gathered in the main showroom. People stood near luxury cars worth more than their yearly salaries. Harold didn't stand on a podium or wear a mic. He just stood where everyone could see him and began to speak. I know this isn't how your morning was supposed to go, he said. You walked in expecting business as usual. And then I showed up with a sack full of papers and turned your day sideways. But I'm not here to fire you. I'm here to fix this place. Some people looked relieved. Others looked skeptical. Harold went on. You've got talent here. But talent doesn't grow in bad soil. It shrivels. So starting today, things are changing. You're going to be heard. You're going to be respected. And if you do your job with pride, you're going to be rewarded. He pointed at one of the salesmen. You've sold how many cars this month? The man, startled, stammered. 6. You ever been thanked for it? The man shrugged. I mean, I hit quota, yeah. Not the same thing, Harold said. Starting today, when you do right by a customer, you'll know it matters. And when you don't, well, we'll fix that too. He turned to one of the women from the admin office. How many service requests go missing every week? She hesitated, then said quietly, "At least 10. "Not anymore," Harold said. "We'll be rebuilding the system from the ground up. You're part of that." There was silence in the room. Then a mechanic, arms folded, asked bluntly, "What's in it for you?" Harold smiled. "What's in it for me? Peace of mind. This place carries my name now. That means every win is mine, but so is every mistake. I've worked too long and too hard to let my name be tied to failure." He paused. "But you all have to meet me halfway. I'm not here to babysit. I'm here to build, and I don't care where you're from, what you wear, or how long you've been here. If you want to be part of something solid, then let's work." In the days that followed, Harold became a regular presence. He didn't hide in an office. He walked the floor. He asked questions. He listened, really listened. He sat with the finance team, uncovered billing practices that were costing the dealership thousands a month in lost discounts. He asked the janitor how often he was asked to clean messes that weren't his job, and doubled his pay. He brought lunch for the service department after learning they'd gone 3 years without a holiday bonus. And he made one rule clear: if you mess up, own it. If you lie about it, you're gone. People started to notice something strange. Harold didn't talk down to anyone. He remembered names. He shook hands with everyone. When a junior salesperson messed up a deal, Harold didn't yell. He asked what went wrong and helped fix it. Slowly, the fear turned into something else. Pride. Customers started returning. Reviews improved. Employees began showing up early, staying a little longer. Not because they were forced to, but because they wanted to. Something about knowing that the man at the top actually cared made a difference. Then, one afternoon, a sleek black car pulled into the lot. A man in a designer jacket stepped out, holding a fancy briefcase. He walked in like he owned the place, looked around, and asked to speak with the new guy. Harold met him at the front. The man didn't bother shaking hands. "I represent the old stakeholders. We weren't expecting someone like you to move so quickly. There's been some talk about reversing the deal." Harold looked at him calmly. "The deal's clean." "There may be legal grounds," Harold interrupted. "No, there aren't. But you're welcome to spend your money trying." The man stared, clearly used to being the one in control. "What do you want?" Harold thought for a moment. "I want you to walk back out the door you came in. And don't come back unless you're buying a car." The man smirked. "You really think a guy like you can run a place like this?" "I don't think it," Harold said. "I'm doing it." That night, the staff stayed late. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to see the updated schedule Harold had promised. He rolled out a new pay system, better commissions, cleaner rules, real benefits. The guy who laughed the loudest on the first day? He walked up to Harold, shook his hand, and said, "I was wrong about you." Harold just nodded. Most people are at first. And then he reached into his sack, pulled out a binder, and handed it to the assistant manager. It was titled, Phase 2. What was in that binder would take everything one step further. Harold didn't just want to run the dealership. He wanted to transform it. Not just into a place that sold cars, but into a business that created opportunity. Not for stockholders, for workers, for customers, for people who believed in second chances. And the craziest part? That sack? It still wasn't empty. The binder Harold handed over was thick, but it was neat. Labeled tabs marked every section. People gathered around as the assistant manager flipped through it. Pages detailed customer outreach programs, employee development tracks, mentorship plans, fair wage reforms, and something that made everyone pause. profit sharing. The room went quiet. Harold stepped forward and said, "Every time this place hits a milestone, you'll get a piece of it. You help build it, you earn from it. This isn't charity, it's fairness. If you believe in what we're doing, stay in. If not, no hard feelings. You walk." No one walked. The next day, Harold put Phase 2 in motion. The dealership wasn't just being managed, it was being reimagined. One of the first moves? Customer satisfaction over upselling. Salespeople were now encouraged to focus on fit, not price tags, matching people with what they actually needed. Within a week, returns dropped. Repeat buyers doubled. Online reviews improved like night turning today. But it wasn't all smooth. 3 employees quit by the end of the first week. They didn't like the changes, didn't like taking orders from a man with no fancy title or shiny background, and Harold let them go. No arguments, no speeches. "We don't need everyone," he said. "We need the right ones." As Phase 2 unfolded, Harold called on people he'd worked with over the years. An old IT guy who rebuilt their clunky system from scratch. A retired finance expert who offered free workshops on budgeting and savings for employees. A woman who once ran logistics for a major chain came in to restructure inventory and parts ordering. She saved them $22,000 in the first month alone. Still, Harold's moves stirred attention beyond dealership walls. A local business magazine ran a headline, "Mystery Man revives failing dealership with a sack and a plan." Then came a TV segment. A reporter showed up, asking about the man with no background in management, no visible wealth, and no public company record. When asked who he was, Harold answered simply, "I'm someone who knows what broken looks like and how to fix it." The interview went viral, not because of fancy words, but because Harold spoke like a regular person. Clear, honest, no fluff, and people respected that. As attention grew, so did curiosity. Folks started showing up just to meet him. Some brought job applications, others brought stories. One man brought a photo. His dad had once worked at that dealership in the 90s. He just wanted Harold to know that it used to be a place people were proud of. "That's what we're bringing back," Harold said. But not everyone was celebrating. Behind the scenes, whispers of legal action returned. One of the original stakeholders wasn't letting go. A man named Vincent, slick, wealthy, and deeply offended that Harold had turned his old business into something real. Vincent didn't like being cut out, and he had friends in high places. One morning, Harold received a formal notice. A private audit was being launched against the dealership. The staff panicked. Everyone thought it meant the end. A few even started looking for other jobs, but Harold didn't flinch. "Let them come," he said. "We've got nothing to hide." For the next 2 weeks, Harold worked around the clock. So did the staff. They prepared documents, organized reports, cross-checked every financial record. The new systems held up. Nothing was missing. Everything lined up. Then came audit day. 2 stern-faced men walked in with briefcases, asking for full access. They expected resistance. They got coffee and an organized digital folder with everything already ready. After 2 hours, one of the auditors, grizzled and sharp, turned to Harold and said, "You've been through audits before?" Harold answered, "I've been through worse." The audit cleared the dealership completely. No red flags, no foul play. Just a new owner who'd cleaned up a mess others had left behind. The news hit hard for Vincent, especially when the final report came back with one line he couldn't argue. "Operations currently exceed prior performance standards in both employee retention and customer satisfaction. By now, Harold's presence was no longer questioned. He wasn't just the man with the sack anymore. He was the reason people walked into work with their heads high. Then, one Friday evening, something happened that nobody saw coming. A man in his early 60s walked through the front door. He had grease on his hands, a limp in his walk, and eyes that had seen too much. He looked around and asked, "Is Harold here?" Harold stepped out from the office, eyes narrowing. "Took you long enough," Harold said, cracking a rare grin. The man didn't smile. He walked forward slowly, then handed Harold a folded envelope. "I heard what you've been doing. Thought maybe you'd want this back." Inside was a worn photo of the original dealership founders, back when the business was no more than a gravel lot and a single trailer. And in the middle of that photo, Harold, younger, thinner, smiling, covered in dirt, one of the original builders. The man with the limp was the last person left who knew the full truth, that Harold had been part of the team that started the dealership decades ago, before it got bought, rebranded, and sold off, before it lost its soul. "I told them back then," the man said. "You had more grit than the rest of us combined." Harold looked at the photo, nodded slowly, then slipped it into his sack. That night, he gathered the team. He told them the truth. "I helped build this place once," he said. "And when it got sold, I let it go. I didn't have the power to stop it then. But I made a promise. One day, if I had the chance, I'd come back, not to take revenge, but to restore it." Nobody spoke. They didn't have to. Everyone understood now why Harold had walked in with a sack, why he knew the layout better than the managers, why he saw problems before they happened. He wasn't an outsider. He was the original blueprint. Weeks passed. The dealership turned into more than a workplace. It became a local landmark again. Customers came for cars, but stayed for the experience. Staff turnover dropped to zero. Kids of former employees came asking for internships. A food truck started parking outside every Saturday because of the crowds. Sales doubled, then tripled. And then came the letter. A major auto manufacturer reached out with an offer, a full partnership. Harold read it slowly, then walked outside, stood near the lot, and watched customers test driving SUVs. The assistant manager walked up beside him. "You gonna take the deal?" Harold said nothing at first. Then he pulled out the same sack he'd walked in with on that first day. Reached inside, pulled out a tiny toy car. Faded red, scratched wheels. "I was a kid when I got this," he said. "Used to tell myself I'd own something bigger one day. Something real." He looked around. "This is it, and I built it the right way." Then he smiled and said, "Let's read the fine print." Harold sat in his office, a copy of the manufacturer's offer spread out on the desk in front of him. It was a big opportunity, not just for him, but for the whole team. It promised access to a wider vehicle lineup, exclusive pricing tiers, national-level ad support, and even facility upgrades funded in part by the automaker. But there was a catch. To accept the deal, Harold would have to make changes that didn't sit right. The proposal included performance quotas. It limited how Harold could structure employee incentives, and worse, it would force him to phase out his independent repair shop, a side operation he'd built to help lower-income drivers who couldn't afford dealership rates. The staff was buzzing. Everyone assumed Harold would sign it. After all, this was the moment every dealership dreamed of. National recognition, major backing, TV commercials, bigger bonuses. But Harold didn't rush. He spent days reviewing every line of the contract. He circled words, highlighted clauses, and made notes in the margins. Some nights, he stayed long after everyone had gone home, sitting in silence with just the hum of the ceiling fan and the smell of old oil from the garage next door. Finally, on a Tuesday morning, Harold called a meeting. Every employee showed up. Sales staff, mechanics, receptionists, even the guy who just got hired last week to wash cars. Harold stood at the front, holding a single sheet of paper. "They want us to play their game," he said. "And don't get me wrong, the benefits are real. More inventory, more money, more exposure." He paused. "But they want control. They want to tell us how to treat customers, how to pay each other, how to hit targets, even if it means pushing cars onto people who don't need them." Everyone stayed quiet. Harold continued. "We didn't build this place back up by following someone else's playbook. We built it with respect, with honesty, with hard work. And it's working. The numbers speak for themselves." He held up the paper. "So I'm sending back their offer, with a condition. We'll partner, but only if they accept our terms. We'll take the cars, but we keep the culture." That afternoon, he sent his reply. It was short, director, bold. The kind of thing most would call a gamble, but Harold had never cared for safe bets. He cared for the right ones. Days passed, then a week. No response. People got nervous. Was the opportunity slipping away? Then finally, a letter arrived, hand-delivered by a senior representative from the automaker itself. She asked to speak with Harold personally. They met in his office behind the same desk where this whole second life had started. She didn't speak in circles, didn't try to charm him. She said one thing. "We've never had a dealership turn us down before." Harold smiled. "There's a first for everything." She looked him in the eye. "We'll accept your conditions." Harold didn't blink. "All of them?" She nodded. "All of them." And with that, the partnership was official. But on Harold's terms, the changes that followed weren't flashy. There were no gold nameplates or ribbon-cutting ceremonies. But the impact was massive. The dealership expanded, carefully. It opened a second location in a neighboring town, hired more people, gave promotions to those who'd stayed loyal from day one. The new facility carried the same values: fair prices, honest work, a welcoming culture. Word spread fast. Within 2 months, the new branch was running at full capacity. Meanwhile, the original shop, where it all started, became more than a dealership. Harold converted a section of the lot into a community space. There were weekend car care classes, budgeting workshops, and a small scholarship program for students interested in auto tech. The sack Harold had walked in with now sat on a shelf in the main lobby, next to the worn photo of the original dealership team. Visitors always asked about it. Staff would smile and say, "That's the bag that started everything." But Harold wasn't done. He began mentoring other small business owners, people who'd lost their way, people who had been pushed out or overlooked. He didn't hand out money. He shared what had worked. He asked tough questions. And when someone was serious, truly serious, he offered support. One of those people was a single mother trying to reopen her father's tire shop. Another was a veteran who wanted to teach repair skills to young men struggling to stay out of trouble. Harold helped both, and with each new success, the legend of the man with the sack grew. But Harold stayed the same. He still drove the same old pickup truck, still wore boots with worn soles, still took his lunch at the same spot, an old bench out back, overlooking the lot. One afternoon, the assistant manager approached him, holding a thick envelope. "What's this?" Harold asked. "Your bonus," he replied. "You've more than earned it." Harold opened the envelope. It was full of checks. The kind of money that could buy a boat, a cabin, or even early retirement. He handed it back. "Put it in the staff fund. Use it for what matters." The assistant manager shook his head. "You really are one of a kind." Harold smirked. "Nah, I'm just someone who remembers what it's like to be ignored, and what it feels like when someone finally listens." By now, people were coming in not just to buy cars, but to hear his story. Families would visit just to take photos with him. Local schools invited him to speak at graduation ceremonies. Newspapers called. Podcasts begged for interviews. But Harold declined most of it. He wasn't looking to be a celebrity. He had a simple rule. "If you really want to understand, don't read about me. Come see it for yourself. Watch how we work. Talk to the people here. That's the real story." And it was. Because this wasn't just a story about a man with a sack walking into a dealership. It was about what happens when someone refuses to let go of what's right. When someone walks into a broken system, not to fight it, but to fix it. It was about building something from scratch, not with fancy words or big investors, but with purpose, people, and patience. And in the end, Harold's biggest accomplishment wasn't that he saved a business. It was that he reminded everyone around him, whether they worked there, shopped there, or simply passed through, that one person can still make a difference. One person with a sack, one person with a plan, one person who refused to give up. And to this day, if you walk into that dealership, you'll see a plaque near the front door. No gold, no marble, just plain words carved into wood. Built with hands, run with heart, owned by all, and below it, just one name: Harold.